Good evening, friends. If you're hearing my voice right now, it probably means you're ready to slow down. So, go ahead, dim your lights. Let the glow of your screen fade to a gentle ember. Pull your blanket close, or tuck yourself into that comfortable corner of the couch. Tonight, we'll drift far away, to a place where the air itself seems to hum with heat, and the ground holds stories older than memory. If this quiet journey helps you unwind, tap like or subscribe. Only if it feels right, and only once you're already halfway to sleep. Now, close your eyes. Let's begin with a whisper of red dust and a horizon that never ends. I first saw the northern outback at dawn, or rather, I imagined it, because few people truly see dawn there. It comes not as a golden flare, but as a gradual softening of darkness, a slow reveal of shapes, ghost gums, termite mounds, maybe a windmill still turning from yesterday's gust. The light creeps sideways, not upward, as though even the sun is reluctant to wake too quickly in this heat. The locals call that first breath of the day the red silence. The air hangs still, and even the insects seem half asleep. Somewhere a kookaburra cackles too early, realizes it's alone, and quiets again. You can almost hear the sand shifting as the night's coolness lifts. It's strange to think that in the 1800s, people from halfway across the world looked at this vast, shimmering landscape and thought, yes, that's a good place for a farm. Imagine sailing from cold English rain into a world where puddles evaporate before breakfast. The first explorers who pushed into Australia's north must have felt like they'd wandered onto another planet, one that refused to follow the rules of the old one. I like to picture them unpacking supplies by the light of that timid dawn. Flour, salt beef, a tin of treacle, and maybe, if someone was lucky, a small bag of tea. The dust would settle on everything, every loaf, every letter home, every cup of tea. It was as if the land wanted to season their lives with itself. Sometimes I wonder how they felt, waking up under canvas after weeks of travel. Did they marvel at the beauty or quietly panic at the emptiness? Probably both. The journals of early settlers in the 1860s described the region as a sea of stillness, shimmering like polished brass. You can sense both awe and exasperation in that line, like someone standing too long in a museum that's also on fire. But for the people who had been there all along, the Aboriginal nations who knew the North's rhythms for tens of thousands of years, there was no confusion. The silence wasn't empty, it was alive. Each rock outcrop, each dry creek, had a dreaming story, a pulse of meaning. When they watched the dawn, they weren't surprised that the dust seemed to breathe. They already knew it did. Imagine, for a moment, walking through that landscape guided not by a map, but by stories. A bend in the river might tell you where to find water. A song might describe how to cross the desert safely. And a constellation could whisper the direction of tomorrow's hunt. That kind of knowledge is like an invisible library spread across the earth. To the early colonists, it looked like nothing, but in truth, it was everything. If you listen closely, really closely, you might still hear that hum. It's the wind brushing over spinifex grass, the low vibration of cicadas warming up, and maybe the echo of those songs still looping through the air. The north is quiet, yes, but never silent. It's more like a whisper that goes on forever. Now, picture the color of the soil. Not just red. There's too much nuance for one word. In the half-light, it's terracotta, then rust, then a shade that looks almost purple, where shadows gather under the sparse trees. The ground sparkles faintly with mica, tiny mirrors reflecting a sun not yet risen. As the day stretches awake, that shimmer becomes dazzling. Travelers learn to squint instinctively or to wrap cloth around their hats. The horizon trembles, and heat mirages form slender lakes that vanish as soon as you approach. You could chase water all morning and end up thirstier than before. But here's a comforting thought. Even in the harshest light, life finds a rhythm. A camel might plod lazily past, its expression somewhere between bored and enlightened. These were the famous Afghan cameleers who arrived in the 1860s and 70s, hired to move goods through regions horses couldn't handle. They built the first inland routes, lines of slow endurance stitched across impossible space. If the land was another planet, they were its quiet astronauts. There's something oddly soothing about imagining those long caravans, the soft pad of camel feet on dust, the jingle of tin cups tied to saddles, the faint scent of kerosene and cardamom tea. At night, the men would sit by tiny fires, talking in languages that mixed Urdu, Pashto, and English slang. They didn't conquer the land. They simply learned its tempo. I sometimes think the North rewarded slowness. Anyone rushing tended to vanish, metaphorically or otherwise. The people who thrived were those who treated time like a long exhale. The soil doesn't hurry. The rivers, when they flow, take their time. Even clouds seem to drift, with exaggerated care, as if worried about startling the parrots. And the parrots, bright flashes of green and gold, often perch on termite mounds that look like little cathedrals. Those mounds can be taller than a person and older than some cities. They're built grain by grain, patient as meditation. Termites don't know they're architects of wonder. They just follow the quiet law of steady work. There's a life lesson there somewhere, but it's probably best to let it settle naturally, like dust after wind. The first telegraph line that linked the north to the rest of Australia was finished in 1872. Imagine how astonishing that must have felt, to send a message through a wilderness where even echo takes its time. Operators lived in small outposts surrounded by spinifex, keeping lanterns lit against moths and loneliness. Their Morse keys clicked like heartbeats across the desert night. If you pause to think about it, that was the moment when the North began whispering back to the wider world. Before that, it had been content to murmur only to itself. Now the scene changes again. The sun is higher, the color harsher. Metal roofs of remote homesteads glint in the heat, each one like a mirror to the sky. A lazy windmill creaks as it pulls water from some deep, reluctant aquifer. In the distance, a herd of cattle moves so slowly it seems they're drifting rather than walking. The air tastes faintly of iron and eucalyptus. You might imagine sitting under a bit of shade, perhaps the rough veranda of an old station house. The boards are hot enough to fry something on, but you have time. A jug of tepid rainwater stands on a small table, next to a single mug chipped on the rim. When you pour, it makes a sound like applause in miniature. I tell you a story there, about the station owner who once tried to grow pineapples because he'd read somewhere they liked heat. The poor things turned grey within a week, crisp as paper. He didn't despair though. He just planted quinces instead and pretended that was the plan all along. That's a fine approach to both agriculture and life. Try, fail gracefully, adapt, nap. By late afternoon, the light changes again. The fierce white begins to mellow into amber. Shadows lengthen like yawns. Even the flies seem less ambitious. You can hear faraway thunder, not the immediate kind that worries you, just a suggestion of rain, polite enough to stay on the horizon. The land exhales, and you might too. There's a small joy in knowing that despite the strangeness, people have always found comfort here. They learned to build houses that breathe, to harvest water from roofs, to cook bread in tin boxes buried under embers. Life in the North has always been a conversation with the elements. Never an argument, just an ongoing, patient negotiation. As evening slides in, the air cools. A pale moon rises before the sky is fully dark, as if it can't wait to take its place. Night creatures emerge. Wallabies, owls, a dingo trotting with professional purpose. From somewhere unseen comes the chirring of crickets, perfectly synchronized. If you listen now, you might feel the same rhythm that guided generations before us. The slow heartbeat of a land vast enough to hold all your thoughts until they fade into stillness. And as you rest in that quiet, imagine the dust itself learning to dream, rising a little in the moonlight, swirling softly over the sleeping plains, carrying with it the warmth of the day and the promise of another sunrise, just as unhurried, just as strange, and just as beautiful. So breathe in and let it go. The red silence waits for no one, but it welcomes everyone. And as we leave this first landscape behind, let your mind wander to the next story, to the faint outline of a town that once waited for rain. Good evening again, my friend. If you've drifted back here after chapter 1, welcome home to the hum of the night. If you're joining for the first time, that's perfectly fine. Each story here is meant to stand quietly on its own, like a single lamplight on a long road. Before we begin, take a slow breath in. Hold it for a heartbeat, and let it fall away like dust settling after a breeze. Maybe you've dimmed your lights again, or tucked the blanket higher beneath your chin. Tonight, we're visiting a place where patience became an occupation. A little settlement that lived half awake, listening for clouds. If this story brings you calm, you know the gentle rule. Tap like or subscribe only if your eyelids agree. No rush, no noise, just stories and sleep. They called it Murapina once. A small town sketched into maps in hopeful ink, somewhere near the Gulf country. The name meant something like Quiet Valley in a language the settlers never quite learned. And quiet it was. Too quiet sometimes. Murapina was founded in the 1880s by a man named Elijah Goodwin, a surveyor who had mistaken humidity for promise. He'd camped there during an unusually wet season, saw frogs hopping through puddles, and declared the place eminently arable. By the time the next expedition arrived, the puddles had become fine powder. Still, the dream held. A dozen families came north with wagons full of corrugated iron, sheep, and optimism. 3 resources that evaporate quickly under the Australian sun. They built their houses low and narrow to hide from the wind. They painted them white to reflect the heat, though the paint peeled like sunburn each summer. And they waited. Not idly, mind you. People in Murapina were excellent at busy waiting. They built fences, held church picnics, and stared at the horizon with a kind of spiritual endurance. Imagine living in a place where conversation often began with the same phrase, "Looks like it might rain." They said it in January, in June, in the middle of breakfast, and sometimes in their sleep. If you walk through the remains of Murapina now, you might not notice you've entered it. There's a stone well, a few sunken foundations, maybe the stump of an old telegraph pole leaning like a tired shepherd. The ground is cracked in elegant patterns, nature's own calligraphy. But if you close your eyes, the town returns easily enough. You can hear the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the wheeze of a hand-pumped organ from the chapel, children chasing a hoop along the dusty main track, laughter turning to coughs as red grit fills their throats. Inside the bakery, there's a man named Thomas Miller rolling out dough at dawn. The dough refuses to rise properly. It's too dry, but he keeps at it, whistling an old sea shanty that sounds wildly out of place this far inland. He sprinkles a little extra salt on each loaf, not for flavor, but for optimism. Salt means the ocean still exists somewhere, and perhaps the rain does too. Mrs. Goodwin, the founder's wife, runs the post office and records every passing cloud in her ledger. 3 cumulus fragments drifting south, she writes one afternoon in 1892. The next entry reads simply, nothing to report. And yet, the north isn't cruel. It just has its own sense of timing. Every few years, the wet season arrives like an overdue guest. The horizon darkens, air thickens. People step outside in disbelief, lifting their faces to the first drops as if rediscovering gravity. When the rain comes, it's never polite. It drums on roofs, shouts down conversations, and turns every path into a river of clay. Children cheer, dogs panic, and the adults suddenly forget all grudges. You can almost hear the sigh of the earth drinking deeply. In 1896, according to a surviving diary, Murrapina received 6 inches in a single blessed night. The next morning, the town held what they called a puddle fair. They raced paper boats in the flooded streets and declared whoever's vessel survived longest to be honorary mayor. The winner was an 8-year-old named Elsie, whose boat was actually a page torn from her arithmetic book. By sunset, the puddles had already begun to shrink, but that didn't matter. They had witnessed a miracle. You can live a long time on one good miracle. There's a rhythm to waiting that becomes almost musical. During the dry years, Murrapina found ways to fill the long rest between raindrops. They brewed beer from molasses, sewed hats from flour sacks, and grew prickly pears because even weeds need companionship. Once a month, the travelling mail coach brought not just letters but gossip, newspapers 2 weeks old, and the thrilling rumour that the coastal railway may extend north someday. Imagine the anticipation of hearing a train whistle that never actually came, like waiting for thunder that stays just beyond the ridge. But time, like the outback, stretches. By the early 1900s, half the settlers had moved on, chasing wetter dreams. The post office shuttered. The schoolroom echoed with dust. A few diehards remained. Thomas the baker, Mrs. Goodwin, a shepherd named Len, who claimed to have taught a cockatoo to recite Psalm 23. Their conversations dwindled, but their humour did not. When a missionary passed through and asked what crops they grew, Len answered, "Mostly patience and disappointment, mate, but both thrive here." It's funny how the human heart adjusts to dryness. Hope doesn't vanish. It condenses, like dew on the rare morning grass. You learn to celebrate the smallest things. A new leaf on a half-dead tree, the smell of damp clay under your boots, the sudden shade of a passing cloud. Those who stayed in Murrapina weren't stubborn. They were simply fluent in stillness. Sometimes I think the town was never really abandoned. It just slipped into the landscape, like a note tucked into an old book. Even today, after heavy monsoon rains, you can see faint outlines of the streets traced by rivulets of water. It's as if the earth remembers where the people waited and chooses that moment to weep gently on their behalf. There's an old phrase in that region: "The rain forgets no one forever." It's said with half a smile, half a prayer, because in the north, memory and weather are the same thing: unpredictable, cyclical, and deeply personal. I like to imagine that someday, maybe tomorrow, clouds will gather again over Murrapina's ghostly coordinates. A soft drizzle will fall through the broken beams of the chapel. The cracked well stones will darken, sighing with relief. And for a few hours, everything, history, dust, patience, will smell of renewal. You and I might never see it, but that's all right. Some stories are meant to stay suspended between drought and dream. Now, as you rest here in the hush between thunder and silence, let your breathing slow with the rhythm of distant rain. Each inhale draws in coolness. Each exhale sends away heat. The town waits still, but it waits peacefully. And in that waiting, there's a lesson the busy world forgets. That sometimes nothing happening can be the most beautiful thing of all. So rest your thoughts beside those quiet streets. Hear the soft patter of imagined rain on a tin roof. Smell the clay, faintly sweet, faintly alive. And when the drizzle fades in your mind, let sleep take its place, because our journey isn't finished. Beyond Marapina's edge lies open country again, endless, red, and whispering new stories. Now, let your mind wander to the next chapter, where the sky itself becomes a companion, beneath the slow sky of red and blue. Good evening again, my friend. Welcome back to the quiet trail through Australia's forgotten north. If you've returned from the dry town of Marapina, you already know the rhythm. Slow breaths, soft thoughts, and no hurry at all. If you're joining fresh tonight, that's perfectly fine too. Every chapter in this wandering story stands like a separate campfire, each one warm, each one waiting. Before we begin, go ahead and settle in. Let the room dim to that lovely halfway light between wake and dream. Maybe there's the soft hum of a fan nearby, or the faint ticking of something mechanical. Let those sounds join the story, not distract from it. They're part of the night now. And if this gentle journey helps you unwind, you know the rule. Tap like or subscribe only if your eyelids can still manage it. Now, close your eyes. We're going to look up at the sky that never seems to end. They say that in the north, the horizon isn't a line, it's a suggestion. You can stare for hours and still not be sure where earth becomes air. The sky there moves differently, slow, deliberate, like a giant creature rolling in its sleep. By day, it's a dome of heat haze blue so pale it almost looks bleached. By evening, it turns red, not suddenly, but as though someone were slowly steeping it in rust and honey. And at night, oh the night, that's when you realize how many stars there really are, and how patient they've been, waiting for you to notice them. It's easy to feel small beneath that sky, but not in a frightening way. More in the sense of being part of something vast, ancient, and remarkably unbothered by the ticking of clocks. In the 1890s, travellers along the overland telegraph route used to write letters describing that sky. One operator near Daly Waters wrote, "At dusk, the heavens appear to melt into the sand. I cannot tell if I am standing on the world or beneath it. That's a line worth whispering to yourself next time you can't sleep. You're standing on the world or beneath it. Either way, you're home." Sometimes, when I think about those early travellers, I picture them lying on their swags, simple canvas bedrolls, watching the Milky Way spill across the heavens like flour dust on a kitchen table. They probably weren't thinking of metaphors, though. They were counting mosquitoes and wondering if their matches would stay dry till morning. Still, even discomfort can become sacred when the stars are that close. The night sky up there doesn't twinkle politely. It pulses, like it's breathing with you. Among the people who knew the land best, the sky wasn't just decoration. It was a map, a storybook, and a calendar all at once. In the dreaming traditions of the Waterman people, the stars traced the journeys of ancestral beings. The dark shapes between the stars, the inky rivers of the Milky Way, were just as important as the bright ones. One of those dark shapes was said to be a great crocodile moving across the heavens, reminding people of the power of water and patience. Imagine lying there, feeling the cool night seep into your skin, and realizing that the stories above are the same ones mirrored in the rivers below. The sky isn't just overhead, it's around you, beneath you, part of you. I sometimes wonder if modern astronomers, with all their telescopes, ever envy that kind of relationship with the stars, where you don't study them, you remember them. By day, the same sky becomes another character entirely. Heat shimmer dances like invisible smoke, and clouds form slow caravans that seem to be moving but never arrive. The blue deepens toward the zenith, so pure it almost hurts to look at. And in that stillness, sound travels far. You might hear a crow half a mile away, calling as if to remind you that gravity still works, or the creak of an old water tower turning lazily in the wind, making a sound halfway between a sigh and a song. I remember once hearing about an old bush pilot from the 1930s who used to navigate this region by sky color. He claimed he could tell how far from the coast he was just by the hue of the blue above him. A bit more turquoise meant humidity. A deeper cobalt meant trouble. It's the kind of skill you develop only when the sky is your constant companion. Let's rest for a moment beneath an imagined gum tree. Its bark peels in thin curls, whispering as it falls. A magpie carols somewhere nearby, a tune that somehow sounds both lonely and content. The air smells faintly of eucalyptus and iron, and far away you can hear the lazy percussion of cicadas warming up for their evening performance. If you tilt your head back, you'll see a wedge-tailed eagle gliding on thermals so effortlessly it looks motionless. That's the real trick of the northern sky. It's alive, but never hurried. Every movement feels stretched, deliberate, dreamlike. If time elsewhere marches, here it strolls. When the wet season finally comes, the entire sky performs its annual transformation act. Dark clouds pile on each other like sleepy elephants. Lightning sketches brief, silent maps of the horizon. And then, after an unbearable pause, the rain begins, not as drizzle, but as applause. In those moments, the red dust and the blue sky finally meet, turning everything into shades of mauve and grey and gold. The air hums with gratitude. Even frogs that have been underground for years wake up and start singing their ridiculous songs. There's a word in one Aboriginal language that means the smell before rain. It doesn't translate neatly, but you know it when you feel it. That cool, earthy scent that makes every living thing pause for a heartbeat and look up. It's the smell of a promise being kept. Sometimes, travellers passing through the north would swear they could see the curvature of the earth itself. That's an illusion, of course, but a pleasant one. It makes you feel as though you're walking on the outer skin of something enormous and kind. It's also humbling. No skyscrapers, no mountains, no tall trees, just space and sky, reminding you that most of what you worry about is very small. Maybe that's why people who spend time up there often become storytellers without trying. When the landscape refuses to clutter itself with details, the mind starts filling in stories to match the scale of the emptiness. One such story comes from a cattle drover named Angus Pike in 1912. He was camped near the Berkeley tableland when he wrote in his journal, "The moon was so large tonight that I felt we'd accidentally moved closer to it. The horses refused to sleep. I can't say I blame them. It's a lovely thought that even animals get insomnia from beauty sometimes." Pike also noted that the silence was loud enough to hear yourself aging. A bit dramatic maybe, but you know what he meant. Out there, sound doesn't vanish. It simply folds itself into the air until you forget it ever existed. Now, imagine night falling again. The air cools, the colours drain gently from the land, and the first stars blink awake one by one like thoughtful lanterns. You roll your swag out under the open sky and lie back. Somewhere nearby, a campfire crackles softly, and someone tells a story you only half hear because your mind is already drifting into its own. The Southern Cross hangs low, its shape sharp and comforting. Above it, the Milky Way stretches in a slow arc, the same path it's taken for millions of years, steady, unbothered, luminous. And as you breathe, you realize something quietly profound. This sky has watched everything. It watched the first people paint their stories in ochre. It watched explorers lose their way and find themselves again. It watched telegraph lines hum and fall silent. It's watching you now too, not judging, not recording, just keeping you company. So as you settle deeper into the stillness, let your mind loosen like a flag in gentle wind. Let your heartbeat find the same unhurried tempo as the land beneath it. You're beneath the slow sky of red and blue, and that's exactly where you need to be. Now, rest here for a while, until we drift onward to where the old tin roofs sing in the heat, and memories echo from the frontier. Good evening, friend. If you followed the red dust and the slow skies this far, welcome back. If this is your first stop along the road, don't worry. You've arrived right on time, because here, time behaves differently. It drifts like smoke. Before we begin, find your comfort. Let the light fall soft around you. Maybe there's the faint patter of rain outside, or the distant hum of a fridge. Tiny sounds that join our quiet orchestra of the night. Take one slow breath in and out. Perfect. If this calm story helps you rest, you know the rule. Press like or subscribe only when your eyelids have already decided to close. Now, let's wander toward the frontier, the one with tin roofs that sang every time it rained. You could hear these places before you saw them. The North's early frontier towns didn't creak or chatter. They clanged. Iron sheets, loose nails, and timber frames that expanded and sighed under the heat. The whole settlement was one enormous instrument, playing a kind of metallic lullaby for anyone patient enough to listen. In the 1880s and 90s, corrugated iron was the miracle material of the outback. It was light, cheap, easy to haul by camel or bullock, and tough enough to survive cyclones if nailed at the right angle and prayerfully enough times. When the first rain of the wet season hit those roofs, it was like hearing applause from the sky. Imagine it. Hundreds of tiny drums beating together as the storm rolled in, echoes bouncing from pub to post office, until even the dogs stopped barking to listen. That's the music of the frontier, not violins or flutes, but weather-playing architecture. I once read about a miner named Bill Harkins, who claimed his roof played in 3 keys. He swore that different corners of his shack produced distinct notes depending on how the wind hit the ridges. When visitors came, he'd climb a stool and gently tap each sheet with a wooden spoon, announcing, "This one's D sharp, I reckon." No one had the heart to correct him. Frontier politeness often meant letting people keep their little symphonies. At night, when rain turned to drizzle, the sound softened to a steady hiss. A perfect sleep track. If only they'd had recording devices then. People said it was impossible to stay angry under that sound. Even arguments over land boundaries or lost goats seemed to dissolve in the rhythm of it. But tin wasn't only for roofs. Everything rattled with it. Water tanks, fences, signs, even improvised cookware. In a place where termites ate wood faster than people could chop it, iron became the language of survival. When I imagine those towns, Pine Creek, Borroloola, Catherine, I don't see colour first. I hear texture, the scrape of metal buckets, the squeak of hinges, the hollow ring of footsteps on a veranda floor. And somewhere, always, the echo of a tin roof adjusting itself to the sun. There's something cosy about it, really. People sometimes think of frontier life as rugged and lonely, but it had its gentle soundtrack, like a lullaby played by the elements themselves. Let's pause for a moment. Picture sitting inside one of those houses at noon. Outside, the air shimmers like molten glass. Flies drone lazily around the doorway, their persistence almost admirable. Inside, it's dim and hot, but the tin roof above hums faintly with the breath of wind. Someone pours tea from a dented kettle that's been boiled one too many times. The taste of the metal is unmistakable, but somehow it pairs perfectly with the dust that sneaks in through every crack. That's the flavour of the North. Earth and iron, patience and sweetness. The people who lived under those roofs were a mixed orchestra too. Stockmen from Queensland, Chinese miners from the goldfields, Afghan cameleers, Irish priests, Aboriginal trackers, and government telegraph clerks who looked permanently confused about where exactly they'd been posted. If history books were honest, they'd admit that most of civilization's progress here was powered by improvisation, caffeine, and a near-philosophical tolerance for insects. One clerk named Albert Finch reportedly ran the Pine Creek telegraph office for 6 years without ever seeing the sea. He claimed the only tides he knew were the moods of the generator. His letters home to Adelaide described the sound of the rain on the roof more vividly than any human company. He wrote, "When it pours, I imagine the world being rewritten above me, each drop a word, each pause a comma." That's the kind of poetry the frontier produced, not out of ambition, but out of boredom elevated to art. You might think such places vanished without a trace, but pieces of them remain, scattered like old verses. A stretch of fencing swallowed by spinifex, a half-buried horseshoe, a roof panel used years later to patch a newer roof, then another. Metal travels, memories stick to it. If you ever drive through the northern outback and see a rusted sheet flapping against a fence post, that's history waving hello. When the wind catches it just right, it even sounds like laughter. Dry, weary laughter, the kind that understands both effort and futility. Even the pubs up here had tin souls. The Victoria Hotel in Darwin, for instance, boasted the loudest roof in the territory. Travellers swore they could find it in a storm simply by following the echo. Inside, the barkeep would pause mid-pour whenever lightning flashed, as if giving the heavens their solo. Someone once joked that if you recorded an entire wet season there, you could sell it later as Outback Meditation Sounds Volume 1. It's not far from what we're doing now, really. Listening to ghosts of tin roofs and calling it peace. Let's not forget the quieter moments, though. Early mornings, after rain, when the roofs cooled and ticked softly. A kind of metallic purring. Steam rose from the ground, and everything smelled faintly of rust and lemon eucalyptus. People swept verandas, straightened chairs, and watched the steam twist up toward a sky still undecided about the next storm. A miner's wife might step outside with her laundry basket, look up, and mutter to herself, "Well, that's enough excitement for 1 week." Then she'd hang sheets that smelled of soap and smoke, and the world would feel freshly laundered too. There's a strange comfort in imperfection. Those roofs leaked, buckled and groaned, but they endured. They were like the people beneath them, a little bent, often patched, but always singing when the rain came back. If you think about it, that's what makes the frontier feel human. It wasn't grand monuments or flawless engineering. It was resilience disguised as noise. The old-timers used to say, if the roof's rattling, at least it's still there. That's optimism at its purest form. Sometimes, when the wind howled too fiercely, people would lie awake and listen for the nails to hold. Children would count each creak like counting sheep, and somewhere between the 10th and 20th groan, they'd drift into sleep, trusting that the storm would pass as all storms do. I find that image soothing. Families wrapped in blankets, rain hammering like applause above them, and dreams forming to the rhythm of survival. Maybe that's why these old stories linger, because they remind us that comfort doesn't always mean silence. Sometimes it's the rattle that rocks you to sleep. Now imagine dawn again. The storm has moved east. The roofs glisten, patched sunlight dripping from every ridge. A kookaburra laughs, because that's his job. Smoke rises from campfires as kettles boil for the day's first tea. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the echoes fading, the metallic heartbeat of a world that refused to vanish. Take a breath in. The air is cooler now, washed clean, and as you exhale, let go of every worry that still clangs inside you, because the frontier is quiet again, and so are you. Soon, we'll wander onward, into the soft dark of the northern nights, where creatures wake and stories grow feathers. But for now, rest under the memory of tin roofs, and let their echoes lull you. Good evening, wanderer. Welcome back to the quiet road. By now, you've listened to rain on tin roofs, and walked beneath the slow red sky. And maybe, somewhere in those sounds, you've started to feel time loosen its grip. If your eyes are already heavy, that's perfectly fine. Let the story do the walking. You just rest. Dim the lights, find a still position, and breathe as if the air itself were drowsy. In through the nose, out through the calm. And remember, as always, if this gentle story helps you drift off, you may tap like or subscribe later when you're awake, and only if it feels right. Now, tonight we're going searching, not for gold or fortune, but for a bird so shy that for more than a century, people thought it had slipped quietly out of existence. A bird of the dark, the night parrot. The northern outback has many secrets, but none whispered quite as softly as this one. The night parrot was first described in 1845, a small green and yellow creature that preferred moonlight to daylight and made its home in the spiny clumps of spinifex grass. Then, almost as soon as it was discovered, it vanished. For decades, people argued about whether it still existed at all. Scientists doubted it. Old bushmen swore they'd heard its call. Like a flute underwater, one said. Imagine that, a melody so gentle that the desert itself might absorb it before the world could notice. I like to picture those early naturalists trudging through the scrub, nets and notebooks in hand, squinting into dusk that looked like melted copper. They must have felt they were chasing a rumor with feathers. In one diary from 1880, a prospector near the Simpson Desert wrote, "Saw something flutter from the spinifex mound. Greenish, perhaps a dream." He didn't know he'd written the perfect description of the parrot's existence. Half real, half dream. The night parrot became a legend. People began to tell stories about it the way sailors spoke of mermaids. Not to prove, but to wonder. And then, astonishingly, in 2013, after more than a century of silence, the bird reappeared. A conservationist named John Young managed to photograph one in Western Queensland. You can imagine the joy, or perhaps disbelief. The scientific community briefly lost its very calm mind. There it was, round-bodied, bright-eyed, and blinking at the camera, as if to say, honestly, were you that worried? I was just taking a long nap. It's hard to explain how something so small can make the whole world exhale. But maybe it's because the night parrot stands for every quiet thing we thought we'd lost. Every bit of wonder that simply went off the grid for a while. When I think of that, I think of the many other small miracles that fill Australia's forgotten north. There's a kind of grasshopper that glows faintly at twilight, its shell reflecting light like tarnished silver. There are frogs that sleep underground for years, waiting for rain like patient philosophers. And there are wildflowers, tiny bursts of violet and gold, that bloom only for a single day after a storm. You might miss them if you blink too quickly, but that's the secret of the North. Miracles don't shout here, they murmur. Travelers who camp under those vast skies often speak of seeing green sparks flit just beyond the firelight. Sometimes it's an insect wing catching the flame's reflection. Sometimes, just maybe, it's the night parrot itself, making a quick inspection before disappearing into the dark again. There's comfort in that thought, that even in a landscape many call empty, life hums quietly in the corners. It reminds me of something an Aboriginal elder once told a journalist. The land sleeps, but it's never alone. That's a line worth tucking into your pocket before sleep. Imagine now that we're sitting at a small campfire in the northern bush. The fire doesn't roar, it sighs, burning wood that smells faintly of lemon myrtle. The stars are so bright they look like pinholes in velvet. The air is cooler than you expected. Somewhere in the darkness, a faint, questioning chirp breaks the silence. You pause, cup your ear and smile. It could be a cricket, or it could be the night parrot. You'll never know for sure. And somehow, that makes it better. Because certainty is loud, mystery is gentle, and tonight, gentleness is the goal. It's funny how history and nature blur together out here. Long before colonists arrived, the night parrot already had its place in dreaming stories. It was said to be a keeper of secrets, a messenger between the living and the sleeping world. When it vanished from sight for more than a century, maybe it was simply fulfilling its role, teaching people how to listen again. You can't rush a miracle, and you can't find something that prefers to be found only by stillness. That's a nice metaphor for sleep too, isn't it? The harder you chase it, the further it hides. But if you sit quietly enough, it comes and lands on your shoulder like a small, glowing bird. The rediscovery of the night parrot sparked not just excitement, but kindness. Conservation groups began protecting entire stretches of land, just so this modest creature could keep doing what it had always done. Exist quietly, beautifully, without needing applause. People built fences not to trap, but to shelter. They planted native shrubs, restored old water holes, and most importantly, they learned to listen for the faint call again. It's almost poetic, a lost voice teaching humans to be quieter. Sometimes I think the night parrot's story is the perfect bedtime tale. It begins with wonder, drifts into loss, lingers in silence for far too long, and then, just when you've stopped hoping, returns softly, as if it had never left at all. You could fall asleep halfway through and still understand it completely, because deep down, every living thing is a version of that story, vanishing now and then, only to reappear when the world becomes gentle enough to welcome it back. Now the fire in our imagined camp has burned low. The coals glow like tiny suns. The night is thick and sweet, and the stars lean closer, listening. Somewhere just beyond the circle of light, a shape moves, small, round, curious. You don't reach for your camera, you just breathe. Maybe it's the parrot, maybe it's only the night itself, shifting slightly to get comfortable. Either way, it's beautiful. You smile, lie back on the warm sand and feel the weight of the day slide away like a loose blanket. The world doesn't need fixing in this moment. It just needs noticing. Tomorrow, there will be more sun, more dust, more slow skies. But for now, you're part of the miracle. Quiet, persistent life in a sleeping landscape. So close your eyes. Let the last sparks fade. And as your thoughts drift into that soft half-darkness, remember the night parrot, the little bird that reminded the world that some silences are worth listening to. Now, breathe. The next story waits just beyond the horizon, where dawn meets the desert again, and the outback itself learns how to rest. Good evening, my friend. You've made it all the way here, past the dreaming dust, the quiet towns, the red skies, and the whispering tin roofs. It feels right that we end together, under the same stars that have been keeping watch since before history had handwriting. Before we begin this last drift through the north, settle yourself just as you are. No need to move or adjust. The story will do the moving for you. Take a deep breath in, hold it, and let it go. The day is ending everywhere now, in city apartments, in desert camps, and maybe right where you sit. And as always, if this calm journey helps you rest, tap like or subscribe only when your eyes remember how to open again. Now, let's talk about how the outback, this vast, sun-struck, endlessly buzzing land, learned to rest too. People don't often think of the desert as a place that sleeps. They imagine it restless, always humming, always shimmering. But the truth is, even the hottest lands have their dreams. They just happen slower. In the northern outback, night doesn't fall. It arrives, like a curtain drawn by invisible hands. The air changes first, dropping from furnace to cool silk. The cicadas trade their frantic rhythm for the soft strumming of crickets. Kangaroos move like ghosts across the open plain, their feet barely brushing the sand. Somewhere in the distance, a windmill turns once, sighs, and stops. Even the metal has decided it's had enough for the day. When the first settlers came here, they didn't trust the quiet. They filled it with noise, boots, hammers, songs, arguments. They built fires that crackled too loud and wrote letters by candlelight, complaining of the uncanny stillness. But slowly, oh so slowly, the land taught them how to match its rhythm. You can't outshout the desert. You can only learn to listen. And so the people adapted. Evening became a kind of ceremony. Horses watered, fires banged, kettles humming softly on iron stoves. Someone might play a harmonica out of habit, its tune wandering into the dark until it sounded like another wind. You can almost hear it now, can't you? That soft, lazy melody floating over the plain, the sound of the outback beginning to dream. The animals learned long before the humans, of course. They have perfect timing. The bilby, with its long, curious ears, leaves its burrow just as twilight deepens. It pads quietly through the sand, collecting seeds and gossip. The wallabies emerge in gentle pairs, tails drawing faint lines like cursive writing. Owls blink awake, tilting their heads as if trying to recall which century it is. And then much later, the sky gives its final bow. Black velvet, stitched with white dust. The Milky Way arches overhead, a bridge between the seen and the unseen. This is when the outback truly sleeps, not in stillness, but in harmony. Every grain of sand seems to settle into its place, every breath of air turns patient, and even the stars twinkle more slowly. Sometimes I think the land dreams about us too, that maybe when night falls, the desert closes its eyes and remembers all the travelers who ever crossed it. The camels, the telegraph men, the bush poets, the children who stared at the horizon and thought, surely there's something beyond that line. In the dark, those memories float like smoke, gathering around campfires long gone. You can almost hear them, the echo of laughter, the clink of tin mugs, the sigh of someone deciding, yes, this will do for the night. If you listen carefully, you might even catch the oldest memory of all, the voice of the land itself, murmuring in its sleep. I remember a story about a cattle drover named Nora Quinn, one of the few women to run her own team in the 1920s. She was asked once how she survived the isolation, and she answered, "The outback isn't lonely, love. It's just resting." That's a line I think about often, because she was right. Stillness isn't emptiness. It's just everything taking a breath at the same time. Nora used to travel with an old kerosene lamp she called Fred. Every night, before turning it out, she'd whisper, "Good night, Fred. Don't burn too bright without me." It's a small, tender superstition, but in a land so enormous, such rituals are the threads that keep people human. Maybe that's what the outback was teaching all along, how to be human quietly. Now, picture yourself lying back on the warm ground. There's no pillow but the folded jacket under your head. The air smells of saltbush and distance. Somewhere nearby, a dingo howls. Not a threat, just a reminder that the world keeps turning. Above you, constellations you've never named watch silently. They don't demand meaning. They just exist, glowing softly for whoever happens to notice. And there, beside the fading campfire, a cup of tea cools, forgotten. Steam curls up for a few seconds longer, then disappears into the night. That's the moment when even thought takes a rest. No plans, no worries, just breath. You've arrived at the same peace that the outback has known forever, the peace of enoughness. When morning comes, the transformation is almost shy. The horizon lightens by degrees, grey, then pink, then gold. Birds start up their tentative chatter, and the first rays touch the tops of ghost gums, making them glow like bone in sunlight. You might stretch, yawn, and realize that somewhere between starlight and dawn, you fell asleep without noticing. That's how the desert prefers it. No countdowns, no alarms, just a quiet surrender to rest. It's funny, isn't it, that a place famous for extremes, heat, dust, distance, should also be one of the gentlest teachers of calm. The outback doesn't hurry, doesn't apologize, doesn't promise. It simply is. And in its patient company, everything else slows too. Maybe that's the real secret of why it feels like another planet, because it's the only one still taking naps on purpose. So tonight, as we finish this long, wandering story, let the same stillness settle over you. Breathe in the coolness of imaginary desert air. Feel your thoughts stretch out like the horizon. Wide, empty, and entirely safe. The dust has stopped drifting. The camels are quiet. The roofs are dry and silver under the moon. The night parrot is somewhere nearby, tucked into its spinifex nest, content. And you are part of this now. One more calm soul resting in the great red silence. May these stories linger like footprints in soft sand. May they remind you that even the harshest places carry gentleness beneath their surface. And may they guide you, tonight and always, into peaceful dreams. If you drifted off somewhere along the way, that's exactly what this was for. But if you're still awake, thank you for keeping me company out here, where the land hums and the stars don't mind listening. Sweet dreams, my friend. Good night from the north and from me.